Pull up a chair and tell me a memory. Why does it matter to you? I want to hear your story, your point of view. Tell me what happened to you.
Hi, and welcome back to Tell Me What Happened, the podcast that features folks from all walks of life telling us one true childhood story and how that event, that experience, has impacted who they are today. I'm your host, Jay Rehack, and like all of you out there, I've had my share of childhood experiences. Some of them pretty wonderful and some sort of traumatic. But I always like to think that everything that's ever happened to me has made me a better person. Now that's not actually probably true, but that's the way I operate. I like to think that all of them has helped me make me a better person. Today, I have as my guest, Jennifer Griffith. Jennifer is an author, speaker, and host of the About Your Mother podcast, where she explores the moments, relationships, and stories that shape who we become. Her debut memoir, Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment, praised by Kirkus Reviews as a must-read, is a deeply personal reflection on motherhood, loss, resilience, and the fragile, beautiful ties that bind families across generations. Welcome to the show, Jennifer Griffiths.
Jay, thank you for having me. I am so honored, and this is a topic after my own heart, for sure.
Jennifer, I saw that when I was reading about you. I said, boy, I hope I can get her on the podcast because what you speak of in your own podcast, I believe, is very much akin or in line with, I should say, some of what my guests have spoken about, certainly not all of them. But I think that you are probably an expert in this field in terms of childhood experiences and how it's impacted how people are as an adult. So I'm going to mute myself, Jennifer, and let you tell your story. At the end, I'm going to come back and ask you a question or two. But take it away, Jennifer Griffiths.
Taken. What happened to you? Well, I'm going to start there. When I was 13, my mother sat me down and told me I had a brother that I had never met and that he was 18 years old. And in that living room, I was seated in my father's chair. Everybody remembers the father's chair, right? And when he wasn't in the room, to sit in it was an honor. But what happened in that moment was that my mother became a woman with a story. I knew she loved being my mom. She lived to be my mom. And the reason I knew that, one, was because she was a wonderful mother. But two, she was raised in an orphanage in Philadelphia after her parents died tragically. Her mother died first after having twins. So there was 5 children under the age of 10 living with her father after the mother passed in Manayunk. And Manayunk is now gentrified, but Manayunk at that time was a very poor neighborhood in Philadelphia. And so finding a way to raise those kids on his own wasn't working. And he went to a church to pray, and a nun came up and said, "What's bothering you, my son?" And he said, "I have these 5 children. This will make me cry. And I can't care for them," because he was working and he was relying on others. And he was a very honorable man and didn't enjoy that, right? When you're relying on others to take care of your very young children. So he placed them in the orphanage with a promise that he would get them out, which was essentially to marry a woman who would help him raise his children. And they were in the orphanage with their father still alive for 2 years. And then he died. And so my mother and her 4 siblings were raised in the Baptist orphanage in Philadelphia until they were 18. And I was, at the time I was a teenager, follow me here, listeners, was the only child of those 5 kids. None of them went on to have kids, just my mom, which is actually very normal for people who are raised in an orphanage to not want to repeat family as they knew it, which is they didn't know family. But my mother had this very strong pull to have a family. She wanted a husband who walked through the door, a dog, and she had me. And so at 13, knowing those pieces of my mom's story and then having my mom say, "You have a brother." And to me, I said, 13, I was sassy. I had an Esprit sweatshirt on and too much Aussie scrunch spray in my hair. And I said, "Ew, gosh, you're pregnant? And she said, no, 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 I just found him. And then I said, how do you lose a child? And she said, I gave him up for adoption. My brother showed up, best birthday gift in the world, but showed up on my birthday, then a month later. And he is a wonderful human being, and he had a wonderful life, and he was raised by a wonderful family in Miami. And then we never talked about it. My brother was now a part of our life. And of course, that was joyous. But as you grow older and these things happen to you, you begin to start to have questions. And on the heels of that, my father, months later, said he no longer wanted to be part of the family. So as a teenager, I had gained and lost two things at the same time. And as you can imagine, in my nucleus family, everything started to unravel. My parents were facing their own pasts as I was maturing and becoming an adult. I was in my adolescence at the time, but I'm watching my parents become people with a story. And as you can imagine, at that time, there wasn't therapy. There wasn't a lot of talking about these things. My parents just laid these truths out in my family and let them drop. And as I grew up, that became a very challenging thing for my own identity because I had lost everything that was safe for me. And as you can imagine, I fumbled through my adolescence and into my 20s. And as I was growing up, I realized what happened then was greatly influencing the way that I was looking at my own life and the filter at which I looked at myself. And it wasn't great. And so I did a tremendous amount of work on myself in therapy, and I found running. And quite frankly, running saved my life in many ways. And as I put myself back together, I began to realize that as my parents fell apart as people, their stories and their own childhoods greatly influenced the parents they were to me. And that became something that I became deeply interested in. And then I had always had a desire to write. And as I was writing for myself, I began to realize if I open this door and I share my writing with others, I'm not going to feel so alone in this. I'm going to realize that there's so many other people and there's so many other stories about broken families and, quite frankly, mothers who relinquished, mothers who, if you put yourself in my mom's shoes, while she was walking me to the bus stop every day, she was wondering if her child was alive. She was wondering if her child was happy. And so in the end, what I surmised was that my mom was very detached, rightfully so, because she was carrying so much pain. And when I realized how much this was influencing me and the way that I carried myself in the world, I went on this odyssey of knowing. I'm like, okay, Mom, I'm gonna research them. They're called The Girls That Went Away. I'm going to research and talk to the girls who went away, all these women who were forced to abandon their children in the decades before Roe. And I want to uncover this. And as I did, I realized that trauma unaddressed is trauma transferred. And in my mom's inability to face that, all of those terrible things that happened to her, in some ways, I was inheriting it. And that did not become more true. And I write about this in my book, Both Sides of Then. It did not become more true when I was giving birth. Because in that moment, as I'm giving birth to my son, I call him the little boy found, I am zipping myself in my mom's skin saying, how on earth did she do that? And how on earth did she carry that secret inside of her for so long? Of course, she was impacted by that. And of course, that greatly impacted the availability she had to me as a mother. And then, of course, having my father leave the family and say he wanted to leave the family was just like her father dropping her off at the orphanage all over again. And so one of the things I encourage people to do with my platform is to look back at the women that your mother was before she became your parent. And I'll say that again, look at the woman she was before she became your parent, because it holds clues to your own identity. And I don't mean in a bad way. For me, knowing my mother is such an incredibly strong person who did not give up and did not give in, that gives me strength. It's not a weakness. Now, are these hard stories to tell? Of course. Was my mom excited I wrote the story in a book? No. But eventually, she saw the power in her narrative. And in fact, now the book's been out a year and a half. She kind of likes it. She goes to book signings with me and she realizes that she's a voice for millions of women who were rendered voiceless in these situations. And so something that deeply moves me, and is what your podcast is about, and Jay, I'm honored to be here, is that what happened to you and what happened to your parents, good or bad, is something that should empower you. And writing, whether it's writing or sharing, whatever your path is, people say, are you healed? And I'm like, it's not healing. It's using our narratives as a source of empowerment. I don't think you can ever be truly healed. There's still some things that when I talk about them can render me to tears. And so I think knowing that you have the pain lives inside of you, but using your story for power, and that is where our strength comes from. And that is something that is deeply important to me. It's something I talk to people about on my podcast about your mother, where your story begins. I say, if you really want to get to know somebody, if you really want to get to know them, ask them about their mother. And that to me is the heart of all of our existence. We all are born from a mother, and we all share this glorious ride of family and legacy and generational trauma and generational joy. It's all ours to share and embrace the messy, imperfect love that we all inherit. And I'll stop there.
That was beautifully said, beautifully articulated. It's very interesting that you happen to be my guest today, because I was staring in the mirror this morning, thanking all of my lineage for letting me be here. It's just, I don't know why, but I was just like, mom, dad, grandparents, everybody. And I was thinking, I definitely, in my lifetime, I've been sort of not so nice when I think about my grandmother, who was not a very nice lady. But my mother was a great lady, but my grandmother was not particularly nice. And I was like, well, who knows what she went through? I don't know what her life was like. So your idea of looking at people's mothers or looking at a mother, I think that resonates. And I think you've already sort of answered the question, Jennifer, but you could add to it a little bit maybe it seems like it's become your life work. You think that moment when your mother revealed something that you really didn't know, and then you sort of had to look back and say, wow, she's been carrying this. And like you said, every moment that I'm away, she's thinking about another, there's another child that she's wondering how they're doing, et cetera. I mean, she must have had tremendous, I can't even imagine the emotion she was feeling and everything else. I'm not going to articulate that. So, but how do you think all of that moment, that particular moment, has impacted you in your career? I mean, I know you're an author as a consequence, maybe not as a consequence, but.
Yes. Well, I think there's a couple of things. It is when my life split in between then and now, which is why I titled my book, Both Sides of Then. I wrote the book in our two voices, both of them in first person. So I very ambitiously, I would say, wrote my mom's story in first person through the stories she told me and other people told me. I zipped myself, as Mary Carr says, into her skin and said, all right, what was it like to look at the world through Anna's eyes as a young girl? Because when I set out to write the book, it was my mom's young voice coming to me, which is a beautiful thing. Yes. And it's almost because I was the one who was meant to free her of the pain and the shame. She had so much shame. And so I'll tell you the then and now piece of it. And so I wrote her story in first person. And then I started to realize, oh boy, I'm actually writing about myself. And I worked with a fabulous editor, as any writer knows, or any future writer who is listening that wants to write. Find good editors. These are people, your sounding boards. It doesn't mean you take everything in that they say, but they sometimes can see the forest through the trees when you can't. And Rachel Howard, I'll give her tremendous credit. I had my voice bookended at the beginning and the end, and she said, no, I wanted more of you. I think you're figuring yourself out as you're writing your mom's story. And that's all she had to say. And then I went and wrote my story and weaved it between my mom's. And the reason I share the writing process with people is because having curiosity about the people before you, your lineage that you mentioned, or the people that raised you, is a doorway into a self-knowing that many of us don't give ourselves time to do. And in doing that writing process that way, I ended up with, of course, I was very angry about a lot of things that happened in my childhood. And there's a lot more that happened that was very dysfunctional: alcohol, violence, and all those types of things. But I ended up with tremendous empathy for these two people. I could feel their pain. I no longer looked at them as people who did something to me. I looked at them as people who had something done to them that they just hadn't resolved. And I think whether your parents are alive or your grandparents are alive or they're passed, you can still do this work. You can imagine what it was like to be them. And in many ways, that's where you free yourself. And to me, this book is total freedom from my past, in that it's now a tool to have conversations with other people and open doorways that I never thought could be opened.
It's beautifully said. I really, I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'll maybe go on Amazon. I don't know where else to get it.
It's everywhere.
Good. I go to an independent bookstore, Women and Children First here in Chicago. I'll see if they have it.
Oh, that would be great.
They should have it. Sounds like the perfect book for them to share with the rest of the world. But, well, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Of course.
I'm gonna sit and think on this for a while, because as you really said, it's then and now. I just like that, just sort of looking back and just trying to figure out what everybody went through. But I'm a big fan of empathy, so I'll leave it at that. I'm talking too much. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh,
Jennifer Griffith.
You. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's our show. I'd like to thank Jennifer one more time, and also thank our sponsors, Sidelining Publishing, publishers of quality books, and currently now 10 by 10 Black Hole Chess. 10 by 10 Black Hole Chess is a unique way to play chess, and it's out on stores. Try it. It's different. It makes you think differently. So until next time, this is Jay Rehak asking you all to please stay safe out there and try not to hurt anybody.